Hey everybody, this is Dr. Hathcock, and this is the PowerPoint slash video to end our World War II topic. So last time we talked, I was finishing up with the Battle of the Bulge in class. So now let's look at how the rest of the war plays out in Europe. So, with the Battle of the Bulge over, I think one of the last things I said in class was that it was going to make it that much easier for the Allies to enter into Germany. And in the spring of 1945, once the weather got better, the Allies did start to march into Germany. You've got the Americans and the British coming in from the west. You've got the Russians coming in from the east. And it's pretty much game over at that point for Nazi Germany. Um, Along the way, tragedy does strike. You have the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, dying on April the 12th, 1945. He suffered a brain hemorrhage, sadly, tragically. He passes away. It's the real tragedy is, he didn't get to see the end of the war here. But with Franklin Roosevelt's passing, Harry S. Truman becomes president of the United States. And you'll see here in the next slide, Truman has some really big, tough decisions that he's going to have to make when it comes to ending the war. But by April of 1945, the Russians encircle the German capital of Berlin. At that point, it really was game over. With each passing day, the Nazis, Hitler and his leadership, they could hear those Russians getting closer, the bombs getting closer, and things like that. And when the Russians took over Berlin, they didn't hold anything back. They pretty much leveled that city to the ground. Rather than be captured, Hitler, as you can see here on April the 30th, 1945, commits suicide. And you'd think that's a great moment, right? That the war could be over at that moment. But Hitler didn't bother to leave instructions after he took his life. So eventually there's a fellow by the name of Karl Dönitz. Dönitz was in charge of Germany's navy. But Karl Dönitz stepped up and said, hey, I'll be in charge. I'll do the act of surrender. And on May the 7th, 1945, Karl Dönitz will meet with General Eisenhower and officially surrender Germany that day, May 7th, 1945. Touched off celebrations around the world, as you could imagine, that the Great War had finally come to an end in Europe. But, after partying and being all happy and celebratory, that's great to enjoy the moment where Nazi Germany has been destroyed. But there's still a war on the other side of the world. Japan still at that point needed to be defeated in combat. So let's look at the Japanese surrender in ending the war over there in Asia. Okay, so the war in the Pacific really was about the ocean. It's about fighting across the Pacific Ocean. The United States, as you can see on this map, sort of goes step by step by step across the South Pacific. You can see also it's kind of like leading up to Japan itself as they go across the South Pacific through the Marshall Islands, the Marianas Islands and places like that. But you eventually reach this point where the United States it's really close to capturing Japan, but you have these two big battles that'll take place at Iwo Jima as well as at Okinawa. Now, in capturing Iwo Jima, it turned out to be a really strong fight. The Japanese sort of had this belief that you fight to the death, that if you die in combat, you sort of are glorifying the empire. So they really fought hard there for the island of Iwo Jima. And then the fight at Okinawa was just as intense, if not more so, than Iwo Jima had been. So capturing these two islands were important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it put U.S. bombers within range of flying missions over Japan continuously, so that U.S. soldiers, the U.S. Army Air Force would be able to attack Japan nonstop, around the clock, things like that. But something else that capturing those two islands did is it kind of showed just how tough taking Japan itself was going to be. You look at a little bitty island like Iwo Jima, there's something like 30,000 American casualties. That's wounded and killed there to take that island. Then you look at an Okinawa, for example. There's tens of thousands of casualties involved in taking that island as well. So the casualty rates at Iwo Jima and Okinawa really kind of showed that, like the closer you got to Japan, the stiffer the resistance was, and there was a real fear that like attacking Japan itself was going to cost a lot of American lives. So President Truman, in taking over the presidency after the passing away of Franklin Roosevelt, he's getting his advice from his military advisors, and they told him these are they're the numbers that they gave the president. They told Harry S. Truman that it would take something in the neighborhood of 1 million American casualties to capture the Japanese islands. Now, may have been inflating those numbers. We don't know for sure. But we do know that it would have cost tens of thousands of American lives to invade those islands of Japan. Also, they knew for a fact at that point that the people of Japan were committed. They were in it all the way. You have what are called kamikaze attacks taking place, where Japanese fighter pilots will literally fly their aircraft into the sides of battleships and aircraft carriers. We also discovered after Japan surrendered that they had all these little one-man submarines set up along their coast, where basically one person could get in this little craft, and it kind of operated like a bicycle. They would pedal this thing out into the ocean, and at the very tip of these things was a big explosive device. So they were willing to also sort of pedal those things out and get close to our battleships and our aircraft carriers that would be parked out in the ocean, and detonate those things. So yeah, the Japanese really were committed to fighting this war through to its brutal end. Well, rather than go through that process, rather than attack Japan and possibly incur 1 million casualties, there was an alternative for ending the war. Moving on here to something called the Manhattan Project. This was the top secret plan for building an atomic bomb. The United States committed a lot of money, a lot of resources. Some have estimated it was close to $1 billion that the United States committed to building an atomic device. The United States will be the first nation to detonate an atomic bomb out there in Los Alamos, New Mexico, there in mid-July of 1945. With the successful detonation of an atomic device, the United States now had an alternative for winning the war. In fact, at the Potsdam Conference, the next point that you see there, and please don't forget that you're going to need to know your conferences of World War II. All right, we've talked about Munich, Tehran, Yalta. Now we've got Potsdam. But at Potsdam in July of 1945, the Allied powers meet to discuss, what it's going to take to end the war in Asia. President Truman was actually at Potsdam when he was, an aide walked up to him and sort of whispered in his ear a coded phrase, "The baby is born." And that was telling the president that we've tested an atomic device and it does work. So at Potsdam, the president stood up and told the Allied powers that we have an atomic bomb. He talked about how lethal this device could be. And all the Allied powers at Potsdam agreed that that weapon should be used or could be used to end the fighting against Japan. And I'm not trying to forgive anything here. I'm letting you understand it's not just an American decision to drop the atomic bomb. All the Allied nations at Potsdam agreed that it was something that could be used to end the war. Okay, so the Potsdam Conference, the whole point of it was to discuss ending the war against Japan, and it was also agreed at Potsdam that the atomic bomb could be used to end the war. With that having been said, President Truman really did wrestle with the decision of whether or not to drop an atomic bomb. There was some talk of, just sort of surrounding the Japanese islands. I guess you could say laying siege. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out, sort of a thing. Just wait them out. But again, they're committed to kamikaze attacks, suicide attacks. If you try to encircle those islands and do carry that out, they're going to commit kamikaze attacks against the U.S. Navy. They're also committed to the point where they would rather commit suicide, like die of starvation, than surrender to their enemies. So I don't know. That's a tough choice in and of itself. So there's a few options there. Option number one, I guess you could surround the Japanese islands and force them to surrender that way. Just wait them out. But who knows how many tens of thousands of Japanese people die in that process. Another option on the table is to invade. You could invade the islands. Truman's advisors are telling him it'll take at least 1 million American casualties if you go down that road. So option A involves tens of thousands of people dying. Option B probably involves 1 million casualties. And you got to think not just like American deaths that would happen in the attack of the Japanese islands. You also have to think of the population of Japan itself too, which possibly would carry out kamikaze attacks. And now who knows how many Japanese people would have died in attacking those islands. Or there is the third option. It's not a good option. None of these options are good. But you can drop an atomic bomb. Maybe, I don't know, 100,000 people within a city die. Eventually, the United States have to drop a second device. Close to another 100,000 people would die. This is a case where President Truman has to make a choice between three very ugly choices. The siege, wait them out. Kamikaze attacks take place. Lots of people die there. Invade the islands of Japan. American soldiers will die. Japanese civilians will die as well. Or option number three is to drop an atomic bomb. You knock out a Japanese city. Probably 100,000 people die. And none of those options are good. It's a hard place to be if you're Harry Truman to have to make this decision here in the summer of 1945. But as I've always told my citizens, my students, as I've always told my students, Harry Truman is president of the United States of America. He's not president of the world. At the end of the day, Harry Truman's job is to end this war, get the soldiers home safe and sound, and that's his top responsibility, is to look after the lives of American soldiers and get them home safe and sound as quickly as he can. There's also this truth: the option of dropping the atomic bomb ends the war quicker. The siege idea is going to take months. The invasion idea could take over a year. Option three, drop an atomic bomb. You can wrap the war up quickly and get the boys home safely. Well, I promise you, Harry Truman wrestled with this decision. It kept him up at nights. But in the final analysis, President Truman said that what led to his decision to drop the atomic bomb was, he said he felt like he would not be able to look American mothers in the eyes and tell them that their sons would still be there had he used the weapon, had he used the device. So that's what he said anyway, is that he couldn't look American mothers in the eyes and tell them that their sons would still be there if he had just used that device. Other reasons for dropping the atomic bomb, again, none of this is good. It all sucks. There's no good decision here. But another reason for dropping the atomic bomb is sort of justifying the expenditure. $1 billion of U.S. Taxpayer dollars have been used for this weapon. So in a way, it sort of justifies the price tag. Also, they wanted to see what this thing was capable of. If you drop it over a Japanese city, you let it go off, you can sort of judge what the damage of one of these devices does. That's a horrible thing, but that's something that the military was talking about. And another big reason for dropping the atomic bomb was to let the Russians see just how destructive this weapon could be. Ever since Yalta, the United States had become very suspicious of the Soviet Union. It was pretty obvious after this war that we weren't going to get along. So if the Russians wanted to be a problem after this war, then the United States would show them what the atomic bomb was capable of by dropping it somewhere in Japan. President Truman did also say that he wrestled with the decision. It was a tough decision, but that when he finally decided to drop the atomic bomb, he said that he never got a better night's sleep in his life. After going through all the possibilities and all the ideas, he just made the decision, and he said he never got a better night's sleep in his life after he made the decision. On August the 6th, 1945, an American bomber called the Enola Gay is going to carry an atomic device in its cargo hold. It's going to fly over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Hiroshima to that point was relatively intact. It hadn't really been hit by American bomb raids. Also, once they knew they were going to hit Hiroshima, they sort of kept away from that area. What they wanted was what we call, quote, a clean target. So that when the bomb went off at Hiroshima, they could tell, okay, this is damage caused by this atomic bomb, not some previous bomb raid. Again, that's cold calculating stuff. But on August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb is dropped on the city of Hiroshima. Once it goes off, almost instantly, some 80,000 people are killed. These things, when they go off, they're like the power of the sun unleashed in a very small space. Over the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks, you have tens of thousands of more people there in Hiroshima dying of radiation poisoning and exposure and things like that. So we put it roughly at somewhere above, somewhere in the 120,000 range of people who passed away there in Hiroshima, the dropping of the atomic device. At that point, the Japanese Empire just couldn't believe that one bomb had done that. The Japanese were thinking, well, there's something wrong with our radar system. Obviously, this was a whole attack that they carried out on us. It took a lot of bombers to deliver that sort of damage. So the Japanese just were stunned, and they just couldn't believe that one device had done that level of damage. So they did not surrender immediately, just thinking that, there's no way it was just a bomber. This was a whole raid that the city of Hiroshima had faced. Well, at that point, Stalin and the Soviet Union realized that this war had days left. And you see the next point, the Russians attacked Manchuria on August the 8th, 1945. If you look on your map up there at China, where it's all sort of that purple color, but then you look to the right of that and you can see where it's orange. It's kind of close to Korea. The Russians began to attack basically into northern China, North Korea, Manchuria, that whole area up there. So, beginning August the 8th, 1945, the Russians go on a real quick land grab at the end of the war. And when the war comes to an end, the Russians will control North Korea. They'll control that northeastern section of China. And in the Cold War to come, communism is going to exist in North Korea, as well as in northeast China. And I promise you that has a tremendous impact on the world that you live in now. The fact that communist forces were there in North Korea, as well as in northeastern China at the end of World War II. Well, the United States contacted the Japanese Empire, asked for their unconditional surrender. The Japanese talked about they were willing to talk about surrender, but they wanted to keep their emperor on the throne, Emperor Hirohito. But the United States said you don't get to make the conditions. It's an unconditional surrender or nothing else. The Japanese refused to surrender. So tragically, on August the 9th, another American bomber will deliver another atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Nagasaki was not as big a city as Hiroshima was, but when that device goes off, something in the neighborhood of 60,000 people instantly killed. Over the next few weeks, you have people dying from radiation exposure and things like that. We put the Nagasaki casualties somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80-something thousand people that died as a result of that atomic bomb. But with Nagasaki at that point, the war was essentially over. The Emperor of Japan asked for a ceasefire. The Emperor of Japan on August the 14th made a live radio broadcast to his nation. And that was the first time the people of Japan had ever heard his voice as he talked to them over the radio. Emperor Hirohito told the Japanese people that they had served honorably in combat, that they had done right by him and the empire. But he said the fighting was over. It was now time for peace. So August the 14th, 1945 is Victory Japan Day, or VJ Day. By the way, on the other one, VE Day was Victory Europe Day. But with Victory Japan Day, the war is essentially over. A few weeks later, on September the 2nd, 1945, in the Tokyo Bay, aboard a U.S. Battleship, the USS Missouri, all the nations that had been involved in World War II meet aboard the top deck of the USS Missouri and sign the Articles of Surrender on September the 2nd, 1945. So with that, you have the end of World War II. So if this war started on September the 1st, 1939 in Europe, 6 years and 1 day later, it comes to an end there on September the 2nd, 1945. So with that, the war is over. You can now celebrate. You can go crazy. You don't have to worry about anything else because the fighting on a global scale comes to an end there in September of 1945. Now, with this war over, there are still problems that the world's going to have to deal with. Europe is going to have to be rebuilt. China is going to go off into a civil war and have some crazy times. But coming out of this war, you now have the emergence of what we call the global superpowers. The United States and the Soviet Union emerge out of this war with very big militaries. Their economies are going to rebound and do quite well. And in what emerges after this, something called the Cold War, you have the United States and the Soviet Union fighting a war of ideas, not necessarily a hot war, but just a war of ideas, and something that comes to be called the Cold War. But we'll talk about the Cold War later. For now, that's it for World War II. I'm also going to post a review video, go over the essay topics for exam number 3. Yeah, we'll have that exam next time we meet. You guys have a great day, study up, and I'll see you. Bye.